Okay, so good afternoon from the cloud. As you get ready for TRENZ this week, can I just begin by acknowledging the gentlemen I have with me on the stage, obviously Kevin Bowler from Tourism New Zealand, Martin Snedden from Tourism Industry Association, along with Norm Thompson. So I'm looking forward to spending time obviously at TRENZ on Wednesday when I come back for my visit, but we thought today we'd give you some details on the pre-budget announcement that I made earlier in the week. As you would have heard, the government is investing an additional $158 million in tourism over the course of the next 4 years. So this afternoon we wanted to give you a bit of a sense of where that money is going. So starting with emerging markets growth, we anticipate spending an extra $44.5 million over the next 4 years to attract high-value visitors from high-growth markets. High priorities in this area will include India, Indonesia and Latin America. This marketing will be invested to position New Zealand as a high-value destination early on in these markets as they develop. This investment will grow demand, build air linkages and be explicitly targeted to the higher end of these markets. In terms of existing markets, we'll be spending an additional $24.5 million over 4 years, and that'll be primarily in 6 key markets, including Australia, China, the United Kingdom, the United States, Germany and Japan, which provide 72.4% of total visitors to New Zealand last year. Increased marketing in Japan is to take advantage of that high spending market's emerging recovery and further growth from the promising youth market. China is to extend partnership activity with travel, trade and corporates, including the Premier Kiwi Partnership Program, and similarly scale activity in the United States, United Kingdom and Australia. Business growth is an area that we're looking to build more tourists, so over the next 4 years we'll spend an extra $34 million in that area. Business event travellers generate a higher spend per day than other travellers. Roughly they spend $318 a day as opposed to $208 for a normal traveller. So New Zealand's capacity to hold conventions and conferences is about to grow substantially with the new International Convention Centre proposed here for Auckland and the new conference centres in both Christchurch and Queenstown. So Tourism New Zealand will use this funding to promote New Zealand as a compelling destination for international meetings and exhibitions in markets that offer the highest yield. They include, of course, Australia, the United States, China and Southeast Asia, particularly India, Indonesia and Singapore. One of the last categories we're really looking at is very high value visitors. We'll be spending $20 million there over the next 4 years. What we have seen over the last decade is that tourist numbers continue to increase, but spend per visitor is falling. These are visitors who spend far in excess of the usual traveller, so we want to attract more of them. They stay in luxury accommodation, they use private transport and bespoke activity providers and use high-end tours. These visitors require tailored marketing approach. They are time poor, relatively price insensitive and value exclusivity. They also provide benefits to New Zealand business through investment. Finally, we'll be partnering with New Zealand's tourism operators, spending $28 million on that area over the course of the next 4 years. The private sector needs to be ready to respond to increased demand by high-value visitors. To assist this, we will offer a new program of co-funding called the Tourism Growth Partnership. The government will contribute up to 50% to initiatives from the private sector that address issues that are barriers to growth in the tourism sector. Some of the issues to the tourism sector include seasonality, increased technology uptake and the recovery of Christchurch. The new funding will absorb and significantly expand the Tourism Strategy Implementation Fund, which currently has $1.22 million a year. Finally, as my ministerial colleague announced today, there will be improved visitor facilitation over the next 4 years by spending $7 million to improve what we're doing around visa applications. So many of our fastest growing tourism markets require travellers to have a visa to travel to New Zealand. That means that efficient visa facilitation is an important part of New Zealand staying competitive in those markets. Immigration New Zealand has already announced they are working to accept translated visa applications in Mandarin. This funding will help support that work. With Immigration, we'll be doing further work to improve visitor facilitations while adequately managing, obviously, the risks that are involved. This builds on the announcements I made when I was in China a couple of weeks ago, which is 24-month multi-entry visas to reduce red tape for tourists and encourage them to return, 3-year multi-entry visa for Chinese business travellers. This agreement is reciprocal, so it will also reduce red tape for New Zealand travellers who frequently visit China. And Immigration New Zealand has also partnered with China Southern Airlines and Air New Zealand to create a streamlined visa process for frequent flyers of those airlines. So in a moment I'll get Kevin Bowler to say a few words, given he'll be charged with spending most of the money. But the brief snapshot summary really is that we're spending $158 million more. That money's going to be spent in a combination of different places, but certainly to attract high-value tourists to New Zealand, new destinations, particularly emerging markets in Latin America, Indonesia and India. Certainly existing markets where we think we're undercooked in those markets, and for specialist areas like business travellers and the likes. We'll be spending more money on making sure that the immigration service works well for our travellers that come. For New Zealand, tourism is very important to our overall economy. Roughly 1 in 10 people have a job as a result of tourism. It's a large part of our economy and a significant export earner. We've got the potential to attract a lot more tourists to New Zealand, but if we're going to be successful in doing that, we fundamentally need to spend more money to have either a wider reach or a deeper reach into existing markets. We are in a highly competitive environment. There are many countries around the world seeking to attract these tourists to their country, and if New Zealand's going to be successful in increasing its overall numbers and the quality of spend, then we need to spend a bit more cash. So it comes as part of an overall program the government has to lift growth and to lift export earnings from 30% of GDP to 40% of GDP in the fullness of time. So that's the plotted summary. Kevin, I don't know if you want to make a few comments, and then we'll just toss it open to any questions you might have about this. If you want to throw tourism questions at me first, we can handle those. If you have any other issues, we can just deal with those at the end. So that's fine.
Thanks, Prime Minister. On behalf of the industry and Tourism New Zealand, we really appreciate this vote of confidence. I think it is a large sector. It's a sector that's very important to the New Zealand economy, and I know that this money is going to make an enormous difference in attracting high-value visitors, as the Prime Minister's talked about. What's exciting is the timing is also about as good as it could get. We've had a fantastic summer. It looks like March arrivals numbers are going to be very strong when they come out tomorrow. So we feel very positive. We're on a bit of a roll. We've had the first premiere of The Hobbit last year, and we know that the effects of Middle-earth are really just starting to be felt around the world in terms of demand for New Zealand, and this gives us the opportunity to capitalise on that new demand, and really grow the potential of what this sector can really deliver. I think whilst this conference is not about business events, I also think this is a great sign of confidence in New Zealand as a place to host large-scale international events as well, with new conference facilities expected in Auckland, Christchurch and Queenstown over the next few years. So we really welcome this news and look forward to working up our plans in more detail in terms of how we'll use the money most effectively.
I want to take some questions.
Sure.
Stay there and we'll grab your questions if you have any. Yeah.
This is a lot about marketing. Are you satisfied that if you're highly successful and you hope you are, if you get an influx of people, is New Zealand tourism got the infrastructure and the capability to handle a big surge in numbers?
Well, I think firstly what you typically see in New Zealand is some real highs and some quite lows, so we're very seasonally affected. So our summer months are often pushing the capacity we have, but the rest of the year not so much. So one of the aims is to try and attract people on off-peak times. But I mean, I think secondly there is the potential need for us to build more capacity over time. You can see in Christchurch they're feverishly working on trying to rebuild their hotel capability. Auckland's got a number of hotels that are being planned, so I think there will be more capacity that will need to be built if we're as successful as we hope we can be, but I think there's lots of capacity to do that. Yeah.
In terms of the high end of the market, which is an area that we've been working in for some time, one of the issues that we have is standards of service and quality. And I don't like to say it, but it's quite true. But we see that sometimes the standards and the quality against hotels and things is not being managed with the guest expectations. And I'm sort of wondering, this wonderful initiative you've taken, what funding will be put into training and trying to help lift those standards of quality. I mean, we see quite a bit. It does worry us. And we work with guests, and we've just had one here. They're about as high end as you can get.
Do you want to comment on? Yeah. Martin might want to say something from Tourism Industry Association.
Yeah, I think that's it. Pretty much falls into the responsibility of the private sector. We're just in the early stages now of creating what we're calling a national tourism plan, and one of the two key pillars of that plan is going to be the quality of the visitor experience, which takes in what you were saying, Guy, about service, but actually picks up the experience right from the moment that the potential visitor begins to think about coming to New Zealand through to the time he or she gets back to their own home. So we know it's really important that we absolutely nail it for those visitors, because as we know, and Tourism New Zealand presented it again this afternoon, word of mouth is the best marketing we have. So if we can send home visitors thoroughly satisfied with their visit to New Zealand, then that's got a huge spin-off for us.
You talked about emerging markets.
Yep.
In Croatia. Why have you chosen to focus on Indonesia, India, and Latin America?
A variety of reasons. I mean, firstly, we see huge potential there. So in most of those markets, we're getting somewhere between 10 and 30,000 visitors annually at the moment, and we see the capacity to, add 50% to 100% on those numbers. Secondly, they tend to be within sort of one flight, so one sector, so we can build on that. And there are areas where we see, for a lot of reasons, a lot of latent potential. I mean, those people are travelling a lot. So if we take somewhere like Indonesia, I mean, I think we can see that that's a market. Historically, we've actually done quite well in the past, and the numbers have come off dramatically. They've got the potential to really boom. Latin America, I was over there, obviously about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it's quite clear from meeting the industry over there, there's lots of demand. I mean, at the moment, it's not well serviced by connectivity, really. You've only got Land Chile flying over, so we've lost some capacity out of that sector. But if we can encourage, more connectivity, that will help us enormously. I mean, just take somewhere like Brazil. I mean, there's 200 million people. There's quite a big high net worth sector there who are very interested in coming to New Zealand. So that's been the primary reason. You might have some other.
I'd just add to that there's also there's also 2 major events coming up in 2015. We're co-hosting the Cricket World Cup with Australia, which will be obviously a very big event in India, and we're co-hosting the FIFA Under-20s Championship with, we are hosting that one, which of course will be really big in South America.
Yeah.
I'm sure the funding is really welcomed. I'm just wondering how much of that will be earmarked to help with the production and implementation of the National Tourism Plan, which
Yeah.
Oh, I think most of it. I think what's going to happen, what will emerge over the next few months as we work through this, is the synergy between what it is that the private sector is leading here, which fully involves the public sector, and what it is that the Prime Minister's charged Tourism New Zealand doing here. These are not two silos, they are fully connected. Kevin's responsible for attracting and getting people to New Zealand. The private sector is responsible for making sure that the experience they receive when they get here is the best possible. My responsibility and other leaders in the private sector is to make sure that there is no gap between those two things, that they are fully joined up. I expect that as the detail of the National Tourism Plan emerges, that there'll be emerging also of the strategy and the actions that are taken to that. So I think if we sit here in 1 year's time, we're going to be saying, that's looking pretty good.
Yeah.
You mentioned trying to attract convention visitors.
Yeah.
In Auckland, we have built a convention centre of international scale here, and there's a bit of a lead time for projects like that. So would there be a problem if we get people that want to come and accommodate?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously we need to have those sort of facilities if we're going to really push up the marketing of conventions. So you've got a number of problems. Queenstown hasn't completely signed off their new facilities yet, but they're getting much closer as I understand it. Christchurch obviously had the issues with the earthquake, and Auckland's been working its way through the Sky City Convention Centre proposal. My understanding is we're getting closer with Sky City, so hopefully we'll be in a position at some point in a future date not too far away to take another step with that. And I think similarly in Christchurch there's a lot of work going on. So in the short term we could obviously market events that the current facilities can accommodate, but the long term plan is to have an integrated New Zealand wide network basically spanning Auckland, Christchurch and Queenstown. Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of the first one, I mean, what President Xi Jinping said at the Hainan Island conference at Boao was that this year there are 82 million trips being undertaken by Chinese visitors, and in 5 years he anticipated that number being 400 million. So if you run the numbers, we get about 200,000 at the moment. It's been growing at about 35% plus a year. Then what is likely to happen if you just extrapolate those numbers is we could go from having 200,000 visitors annually at the moment to potentially 1 million. Now, there's a few ifs and buts there along the way, but I think it's eminently possible we'll see a lot more travellers coming from China. We would welcome that. I think the real key for us is to make sure that we market to the segments that we actually want. There's quite a high value in there in China. So at the moment about half our visitors also come via Australia. So having them coming on dedicated trips to New Zealand is quite important because they stay a bit longer. And there's also a business audience there that we could appeal to. So essentially we're going to spend that money reiterating where both countries want to go, which is to build the tourism capability both for New Zealand travellers going to China obviously, but Chinese coming to New Zealand. Just in terms of the earthquake, I mean obviously we are very saddened to hear the news. It sounds like a devastating earthquake, 6.6 I think on the reports I've seen. My understanding is on the most recent information I had, there are about 160 people who have lost their lives. I haven't had any advice that any New Zealanders have been caught up in the tragic events, and obviously we just encourage New Zealanders if they are travelling to Sichuan province to make sure that they check the travel website on the MFAT site. Okay, do you guys want to rip in any other domestic questions you want to ask me, or you? Yeah.
Poll due out soon shows that National probably won't get a government on their own after the next election. Do you consider working with New Zealand first in the future to build this out in the past?
Yes, officially there'll be a lot of polls between now and then, so we'll take it all with a bit of a grain of salt. There's a wide range of them, and actually in none of the elections have we been able to govern alone, even though we've had very strong results. In terms of New Zealand first, National's position is that in every election we try and give voters a pretty clear indication of who we think we can work with and who we can't. So my expectation is next year we'll give voters a bit of an indication, both in terms of New Zealand first, but other parties, whether we will or won't be in a position to be able to potentially at least have discussions with them after the election. Yeah. Yeah.
Can we expect to hear more from the government or from Treasury through the prospectus to try and clarify what the
Proposal, yeah. So that is a matter ultimately for Mighty River Power and the due diligence team. I know that they have been looking at that issue over the weekend. I'm not in a position to give you any indication yet about whether they think there needs to be any supplementary disclosure, but we may be in a position at least to give you advice on that in the early part of next week. So they've been looking at it, but there's been no firm conclusion reached yet.
On the issue of both power and ruling this election,
Yeah.
the President talked about the support for it in this department to renationalise. So the nation is there. Would you consider negotiating on this issue at all?
Well, if I understood his his point, I think it was slightly different from that. I might be wrong, but I think it was a slightly different model to that. But look, I mean, in terms of bottom lines and who we might work with, we've taken a fairly consistent view. We've always said, in terms of who we work with, we try and give the voters a bit of a clear steer on that in election year, at least who we'll have discussions with, because it's always subject to what we can reach and what we can agree. In terms of bottom lines, I'm not going to rule things in and out in election year, simply because it becomes a bit of a fiasco if you end up doing that. And I think it's far better to say that, if we're in a position to potentially form a government post the 2014 election, we'll sit down with those political parties, we'll see whether we can reach a meeting of the minds, and we'll go from there. But I mean, it's very clear, from the government's actions, that we believe that the mixed ownership model is the right approach. We think that is going to both deepen the capital markets and be the right actions for those companies themselves. So we think there's a strong merit behind the program, but in the end, we'll see how that goes. Hopefully that's fine.
The bike trails have been very successful, and we hope that the ongoing investment in the cycling trails will help develop. Through a restructuring of those, how do you think that will affect the ongoing maintenance of the trail?
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is we're delighted they won the international award they did last week, and I think it was a sign of how successful the trails have been. As you're probably aware, there's been a sort of establishment board or a foundation board that's now been established, chaired by Richard Leggett. And that is looking at how the trails might work together and how they deal with all of those issues, from maintenance to the sort of rural connectivity of the trails. So I'll leave that to them to continue to work on it. But the fundamental principle behind them was that the government put in about half of the funding of the construction of the trails, and then either local councils and local communities groups were responsible for the ongoing maintenance of them. So I haven't seen any requests to kind of change that, and that would certainly be our preferred outcome. But they've been very successful. Yeah. The business partnership, yeah. I mean, you might want to talk to that if you want to, Martin. I'm more than happy to, but you go. Please.
I think it's a real opportunity for more money to be created to achieve better things and to do it with greater cohesion. So we're absolutely delighted with the Prime Minister's announcement, obviously about everything that's been announced today, but in particular about this. The private sector is willing, able and knows the time's right to step up and invest in our industry's future. The government knows the same thing. Together we'll get a better end result.
Yeah.
MB will have control, but no, MB is an entity, the Ministry of Business, Innovation, Employment. We are now working with them on an absolute daily basis to make sure that our collective thinking is on the same page, and it's already apparent to us that everyone is shifting into the position of trying to work together and to make the best collective use of the resources that we have.
I mean, what is, I think, true is that prior to this point, we would have spent about $360 million on marketing over the course of the next 4 years for tourism from a government perspective, and that's really now gone to about $500 million. But we're only one part of the tourism promotion for New Zealand. The private sector's always played quite a big part, and it really depends on either individual companies or regions. So a company like Air New Zealand, for instance, does significant promotion for New Zealand, as do a lot of the airlines. But it's equally true that you'll get, for instance, regions like Wellington or Queenstown, or the likes, Auckland, undertaking significant promotion themselves. So the aim here is to keep those two parts connected together. I mean, in the end, if the government just wanders off on its own and is disconnected from the private sector, you can potentially be spending money in the wrong places. And equally, if the private sector spends money in a different direction from the government, then we're not getting the biggest bang for the buck. But the sectors work very closely together. If you think about Martin's organisation, he meets with me very regularly, meets with Kevin Bowler very regularly, and so there's quite a close meeting of the minds there. And I'm confident as we go out, spend that money, we'll make sure that there's agreement and it's well spent. Okay, well, thanks very much. We'll see you on Wednesday when we're at TRENZ.